Hello and welcome to Module C, Data Needed to Complete the Affirmative Action Plan. Today we're going to be talking about many things as it relates to the actual data that you are be sending us to complete your plan. But first, let's start with this disclaimer. You probably heard this before. We're only talking and giving you general information today. Nothing is legal advice. Everything is copyrighted, so it can't be reproduced or copied or used without permission from DCI Consulting. So what are we going to cover? So we're going to talk about why clean data is important. We're going to look at the required data. We're going to look specifically at our DCI file specifications document and kind of go through what you need to think about as you're pulling your data. Then we're going to talk about what are we doing with this data? How is it used? How do we connect the dots here? So how do we use it in the AAP? We'll look at some common data problems. Then we're going to look at data validation. So we're going to do this for you, but there are some things that if you want to do it before you send it to us, you are absolutely welcome to. So we're going to look at some data validation, and then we'll talk about some best practices. So let's get started. So we'll start with why clean data is important. So if your data could speak, so one of the things that you really need to keep in mind as you're looking at your data is that you're trying to tell a story. Your data tells a story. When the OFCCP gets your data for an audit, they are trying to put together a story using your data. So you want to know what's there and how to connect the dots. You know, if you see somebody in your last year's file, they're not in your this year's file, you would expect them to be in the terms. You know, if you started out with 100 females in one department and this year you have 50 females, can you account for where those other 50 went? You know, so your data is going to tell a story. So you want to know what that story is. So our motto for today is do it right the first time. And this is really critical here. So one of the communicate things that you need to do when you get your results, and this is covered in actually in Module B, you'll know that you need to communicate all of your results to managers, to your executives. You have training that's required that you do once you get your results, and then you need to use those results to create something to make sure that you are building more diversity in your organization. So if you have placement goals, you know, how are you going to recruit? Where are you going to recruit? You have to build this plan. But if your data is wrong, you can't build the plan appropriately. And I say that because we do have some clients who say, you know what, I'm so busy. Can you just give me my plan? And if I get an audit, then I'll go back and I will make changes and look at all of your data questions. So when we do that, it causes some problems. And so that's why we want to do it right the first time. So if you wait until you get an audit, so let me give you a scenario here. So you have a January 1 AAP. Your results are done in February or March, and you're ready to communicate. So you go ahead and you communicate these results. You tell all your senior leadership, oh, hey, we have placement goals in professionals for minorities. You know, we have some minority goals in our technicians. You train all your managers. We have a plan. Your recruiters are out trying to, you know, find minorities to be qualified and fit into these roles. And then you get an audit in August. And you think, okay, well, let's go back through that plan and clean it up now. All of your goals might change. So you have communicated incorrect goals to your executives. Your recruiters may have been out trying to recruit for the wrong types of individuals. There's just so many things that can go wrong. If an auditor does happen to have to interview a manager or your executive, and they say, well, I don't know, she gave us one goals, you know, a long time ago, and now this week she gives us a different set of goals, it can become a trap for you. So you want to be really careful. You know, data changes change your adverse impact indicators. You probably have not, either you have some experience with affirmative action and you know what this is, but we do cover it in another module. But if you have adverse impact, that just means that a decision that you made adversely impacted a specific race or gender. Whenever you have these indicators and you have an audit, the auditor wants to know what happened. Give me all of this information, and they start doing deep dives. Well, if you have changed your data at the time of the audit and now you have all these indicators, it's going to be problematic in the audit. So you just want to do it right the first time. That's the emphasis here. So what's at risk? Potential violations, data integrity, and for me, I worry about personal reputation. So if I was sitting in a company and I communicated the wrong information to my CEO, or I trained a bunch of managers on goals that weren't goals, that would look poorly on me. And here at DCI, we don't want our clients ever to look bad. We want to be here for you all the time and for you all to do the right thing. So let's do it right the first time. So the data required and the specification. So you should have this template from DCI. If not, let us know. We'll go through it. But here's kind of we'll do a high level snapshot. What are we looking for? And then we'll kind of look at the template itself. So the employee roster, or your current roster, your snapshot, you might hear it called that as well. So if you have a January 1 plan date, we're going to want a snapshot, a static snapshot of your workforce as of January 1 or December 31st. In this case, we want anyone who is on your payroll on that date, as of that plan date. You also need a previous roster. Now, if you are a longtime client, we probably have your previous roster. Some clients like to go ahead and give that to us anyway at the start of each year. If you're a new client, you'll have to provide that to us the first time. So the previous roster is just whatever we used or whoever used to create your plan 1 year ago. And again, it would be a static snapshot of the workforce 1 year ago. You'll also need a hire file, so information on those hired during the previous 12 months. And even if those people are no longer with you, so you hired them, they worked a month and they quit, they were still hired, so we need them to be in that file for us. The promotion file is going to be anyone who was promoted during the previous 12 months. So we need the information to and from. So went to title X, was in title Y. Was in location X and is now in location Y. So we need the to and the from sides if possible. The termination file, anybody who was terminated during the past 12 months, even if they've come back again. So we need to have those in that termination file. The applicant file, this is your highest risk file. We need to see all applicant pools associated with each hire in the hire file for the last 12 months. So if you hired John Doe, we need John Doe and anybody who applied for that position that John Doe filled. And then one file that's really helpful to us is a transaction file. So this is going to be any movement that happened, a lateral movement, a demotion, job reclassifications. So what we're going to do is we're going to reconcile everything. So if John Doe is a HR manager in last year's file and he's a maintenance manager in this year's file, and it wasn't a promotion, we're going to be asking you, how did he get into that other title? And so this transaction file would tell us. We'd look in there and say, oh, he got demoted, or he took a lateral move. Anything that we can't find an answer for in your data file, we're going to send you a list of data questions that you'll need to answer. So this transaction file is going to help us not to have to give you as many questions, which I'm sure that you all would appreciate. All right, so let's look at this template that we talked about. So the template, it's got multiple tabs. There's explanations on each tab of what you need to do. So this is the employee roster tab. So you'll see in the big boxes at the top, it's going to tell you why you need certain information and what you need it for. It'll give you some helpful information. That middle line, anything in green is required. Anything in yellow is really good to have. So if you can't provide us anything in the yellow tabs, that's okay. It just helps us, again, to make sure we understand your data completely. The facility location here, this is kind of two parts. So we need to know where the person is physically sitting, and then we also need to know what AAP location that we need to put them into. So you kind of have to think of that two different ways. Entity and company here will come in handy a couple of different ways here. So let's say that I'm in entity 1234 and I work on Main Street, but entity ABCD also is in my same building, but we can't be in the same affirmative action plan because of legal reasons. So that entity number is going to tell us, don't put all of everybody working on Main Street into one AAP. Because of the entity number, they go in two AAPs. So that's where that becomes kind of critical. And then over here on the right, you can see there's yellow with compensation analysis only. So if we are doing your comp information, please make sure that you fill that in for us. The previous year roster, we should already have that. It's going to have all of those same columns that we just went through. But if you're going to provide us a new prior year roster, then you don't really need to give us quite as much information because, again, what we're using this for is we're trying to look for differences. So Jane Smith is a receptionist here last year. If in the new file she's some sort of a manager, we would expect to see her in the promotion file. So that's what we use this roster for. So it's got the same kinds of information on it. So the hire file. What we need here is we need anyone hired for the previous 12 months. What's key here, if you can provide it, and many employers can't provide it, so please don't feel like you have to, but it is certainly helpful. So that you can give us the employee ID. If you can feed in this applicant ID, it's tremendously helpful. Because if we think about John Doe here, maybe John Doe is his legal name, but he goes by Jack. So in the applicant file, he's applied under Jack Fred Doe. So we are not going to know 100% that John Doe and Jack Fred Doe are the same person unless we have an indicator here. So if you can provide it, that's great. Otherwise, we have some methods that we can figure out, and we'll do it manually where we need to. And then the ones that we can't figure out, we will again problem list for you. And then again, you're going to see the same types of information: the hire date, the facility location, the entity, etc. The promotion file. So we need to know the job code the employee came from, the job code the employee went to, the promotion date, the old location, old entity, new entity. And again, we're just trying to reconcile all of our data. So the termination file. Again, all going to look very familiar to you by now. Nothing out of the ordinary here, just anybody who terminated in the last 12 months. The disposition reason, or the reason for terminations. If your company will not allow you to give us the specifics, then at a minimum, we need to know if they were voluntary or involuntary. If you can give us specifics, that's very helpful to help us help you in the event of an audit if we show adverse impact indicators in terminations. And the applicant file. So let me caveat this by, it's really important that you listen to our other module on applicants. So the applicant file is going to be your highest risk in the event of an audit. A lot can go wrong in the applicant file. So there are a lot of things that we are hopeful that you will take away. So let's go through this. So the applicant ID is really helpful. That is typically system generated. So I create a profile, I apply for one of your jobs. What sometimes happens, actually happens a lot, is that I forget my username and password. Maybe I come back a month later, I forget it. I didn't write it down. So what do? I create another profile and I apply for the same exact job. So you could see Edwin Roosevelt in the same rec, the same job 2 or 3 times, and it could be a true duplicate. So the applicant ID is really important. The employee ID, just like we saw in the hire file, if you can add the employee ID to your hires, that's going to be tremendously helpful. A lot of them we're going to be able to match up. If Betty White is an Asian female in the applicant file and we see Betty White in the hire file, um, then we're going to know that's the same person. If we see Betty White, unknown female, and we see Elizabeth White, we might kind of feel like that's the same person, but we may want to ask you about that. So we need to know the job code they're applying for, the title they're applying for, what facility did they apply for, and then again, the entity or the company if you can provide it. Critical pieces of information here are your disposition code and your reason. So what we would expect to see here is what you see on the screen. What we don't expect or we would not want to see are non-final applicant codes. So what is that? If I were to see something like interview pending or just the word pending in a requisition that is filled and closed and has a hire in it, then I know something's wrong. So somebody hasn't gone in and finished the process with those applicants. So we need to see final applicant codes. Internal, external, this is extremely helpful. You can see here this company, what they've done is nice, and you certainly don't have to do this, but it was nice. So if it's just hired, it's an external hire. If it's hired/internal, it's an internal hire. And so that helps us know how many people are we hiring from the outside and how many people are moving from within the company. Some other things to think about, and again, we'll have some of this, but if you've got any changes or if you're new to DCI, you're going to want to help us provide this. So a list of job groups. Now DCI is going to help you A to Z try to set up job groups and think about your company and what's the best structure to use. We're going to help you through that. But if you're maintaining that on your side and providing it to us, if you want to give us a list of those job groups, especially if they change, if you add one or you change the title one, just let us know. Just add it on a tab in that workbook. Job titles, a list of titles and corresponding job groups and census codes. Chances are you're not going to have all this, and that's okay because, again, we're maintaining this. This is really more for if something changes. So if you retitle your entire company, you do a complete reorg, we're going to need a list of all the titles and maybe even a map back to what they were so that we can get your plans done. Addresses is a little bit newer. And we've started asking for this now because of if we're filing your EEO1 and your vets or California Fair Pay or doing comp analysis, we'd like to, instead of just saying Pittsburgh is where the location, give us the full address of the location in Pittsburgh. That will be extremely helpful. There is some confusion around location, the word location, because there's two different things, right? So we have the physical location of where the person is working, but we also have the AAP location, which could be different from the physical location. So it's really important that you think about that and send us. I have one client that's added a tab every year, and they just put in, okay, here's all our addresses, and here's a list of the AAP codes, and here's what address goes in what code, and it's really helpful. So something like that is a good to provide as well. Applicant disposition codes, again, we're going to have this, your full list if we've been working with you or we've been preparing your plan. But if anything changes, maybe you get a new tracking system And you have all new codes. So if you could give us a list of those. If there's a new code that you forget to tell us about and we can't tell if it meets the definition of an internet applicant, then we'll just, again, we'll put it on that data question list and we'll send it back to you and have you talk us through, and we'll make the decision together if they are indeed an applicant or not. Same with termination codes. Let us know if they're voluntary, involuntary, if you have any new ones. If we find one that we haven't seen before and can't tell if it's voluntary or involuntary, we're just going to ask you about it. So how's the data used? So let me preface this by saying that there is a module that will walk you through every single report. So I'll kind of gloss at the top of each report, but I won't go into full detail for that for you. So, but let me give you the 50,000 foot view first. So we're going to stick with that January 1 AAP. So on January 1, when you send us your data, we're going to do what's called a look forward. And that's primarily using that employee snapshot. We're going to look at who's sitting in the seat today. We're going to compare it to availability. We're going to do some calculations and find out if you need to set any placement goals. We're going to look at your utilization. We're going to talk to you about that hiring benchmark. There is no number, it's just a percent sign there because it changes every year. And then we're going to help you with a recruiting strategy. Okay, you've got these placement goals. How can we help you? Where can we help you? Do some outreach and log your outreach and evaluate your outreach. At the same time, we're going to be doing this look back. The look back uses all of your history files. So it looks at your last year's goals that you might have had, and we see who did you hire, who terminated, who was promoted. Did you meet those goals? Did you not meet those goals? Did you make progress on those goals? We're going to look at your data collection, how many positions you had available, how many veterans and disabled, did you hire, and things like that. We're going to look at your adverse impact, or what's called impact ratio analysis. You've heard me say that a couple of times. There's a whole module on that one too, because it is so critical. But that's looking for, it's going to look at all of your decisions that you made to see if any race or gender was adversely affected by a decision. So that employee roster, it feeds several reports. It feeds a workforce analysis report, and all the asterisks are telling you that there's a module set up for you to learn about each one of these reports and how they function. So the workforce analysis report, we're going to be looking at those departments, the salary codes and your salaries, because the workforce analysis is in department order, rank filed from high to low based on either salary code or average salary. So their roster's used for that. It's used to prepare your job group analysis. That's a report that says, okay, job group 2A, professionals technology. Here's the utilization, the makeup of that job group. And then here's a list of titles that fall into that job group. That all comes from your roster. Your utilization reports. So you have a couple of them. You have an individuals with disabilities utilization report, and then just a general utilization report. Both tell you the makeup of your workforce. Your incumbency versus availability reports tells you who's sitting in the seats today, and if anyone were to leave or move, what would the availability to fill that position be? And that's based on people that can move from within your organization and people who come from the outside. That's all kind of feeding off of this employee roster. And then your compensation. If we're doing your compensation, and we're going to use the information on that roster to work through an analysis for you. If you are doing your own compensation analysis, we suggest that you still try to at least do a one pass using this roster, because if you are audited, you need to send compensation data that comes from this roster. So we want to make sure you know the results. We all know the results of a compensation analysis if it's based on this roster. Your history files. That's gonna be your hires, promotions, and terminations. So that's going to feed your goal attainment reports. You had goals last year. How did you do? Did you hire females into your professional job group or promote females into your job group, your professional job group if you've had a goal there? That adverse impact analysis we talked about. It's going to be calculating those from your history files. And then your personnel activity reports. Those are reports that would tell the OFCCP we hired this many people or we terminated this many people. So it's those types of activity reports that are generated from those history files. Your applicant file. It's going to feed your adverse impact, your selection adverse impact report. So we're comparing who was hired against who was qualified and considered in your applicant file. All of your data collection reports, how many individuals with disabilities applied for your jobs and then how many were hired, how many positions did you actually fill. So all of those data collection pieces that we have to turn in. Your hiring benchmark report's going to tell us how many people that applied for your jobs self-identified as a veteran and then how many were hired. And then your hire reports, those are reports that are going to tell you, okay, here's all of the people who applied, here's the applicants, here's the number of people, here's the number of hires. So all of that feeds from that applicant file. So let's talk now about some common data questions. Data problems. So in the employee file, we typically see, actually we see this quite often, if you're allowing your HR staff to hand type or pick from lists that don't have a code with them, we'll see same title, different spelling. So HR manager and then human resources manager. Or if they're hand typing it in, you might see human resources manager misspelled. So what we end up doing is normalizing all of these titles to get everybody into the same job title. So something you might think about is that might be something that you can look at before you send your file and do some of that for us. We will do it, and happy to do it for you. But if you want to do some of that is also very helpful. Same job title, different EEO and job groups. So this is a no-no. So this is in the regulations that you should not have any title that crosses EEO or job group. So in this case, this company has their job groups established with the first digit being an EEO code. So we can see crane operator in 6A craft workers, crane operator in 7A operators, crane operator in 9A service workers. So this is a problem. And so if we saw something like this, we would simply, again, problem list it and say, can you help us understand this title and help us put it in the correct job group for you. Don't see this one very much anymore, but mixed compensation in one column. So what we would have expected to see, and the issue here is we will catch it on our side, but heaven forbid we didn't, and something like this got sent to the OFCCP, a comp report that had a mixed column. We're not sure that they would catch it, and they may analyze things inappropriately. So we want to make sure that we have a column for hourly pay, we have a column for annual pay. Don't necessarily need, weekly or monthly pay, unless that's something that you use internally, and then we would want it in a separate column. And then we always see missing pieces, and this is typical, but again, we'll find it on our side. If you all want to look for it and fill some of this in, that will be helpful. So Joan is missing a race, Fred is missing gender, John is missing a department, Sue is missing a department and location. If we saw this, we would put it on a problem list and we would send it to you and ask you to please fill it in. So let's look at the history files. So in the promotion file, we see this a lot. HR generalist to HR generalist. So let me back up and say that you, as an organization, define promotions. The OFCCP cannot define them for you. You define it. So in this case, while it looks like, wait a minute, this is a lateral or this is just somebody transferring, it may not be. What if Joan was an HR generalist for the operations center in Cleveland that had 100 people in it, and now she's the HR generalist for an operations center in New York City that has 5,000 people in it? That's definitely a promotion. But we're not going to necessarily know that. We might, but we might not. So when we say something like this, we're just going to problem list it for you, and you can say there's a little column on the left side of our data question list, and you could say, yep, that's a promotion. So again, you define promotion. We don't at DCI, and the OFCCP does not either. Missing termination reason. We don't know why Cindy left. We would send that back to you. Or again, you could fill it in before you send it to us. 2 termination rows with no rehire row. Red was terminated for to leave for another job opportunity, and then he also terminated to return to school. But we're not seeing a hire row in the data. Now, it could be, you have to think about this too. What if Rudd, well, we would say this, we would see it. I was going to say if he was reduced, if he was laid off for a little bit, but then he could be brought back without being in the hire file. But it appears on the screen that he left for on his own. So we would expect to see a hire row. Promoted after termination, but there's not a hire record. So here's Fred. He left on January 1st of 2017, and then on February 8th, he was promoted from welder to welder senior, but we don't see a hire row. So we would come back to you and say, how did he get back into your workforce? And then here's a promotion that looks like a demotion, director of maintenance to HR representative. Again, we would just say, is this a promotion or not? It could be. Don't know your circumstance. So you would again say, you could either say, nope, that's a mistake that should come out, or yes, that's a promotion. The applicant file. Hires with unknown race and gender. So we hired Wilma, we don't know her race or gender. So what we would do is we're going to look in the hire file, and we're going to look in the current roster, and we're going to see if we can find her race and gender that she may have indicated in another fashion. We will input this on our side. Don't change any HR systems on your side. That's a bad idea. So we'll try and find the race or gender and put it in on the applicant file only for the hire. If we can't find it, if it's missing in the applicant file and the hire file and the current roster, then we're gonna write back to you and say, hey, can you help us find out Wilma's race and gender? Non-final applicant disposition codes, we talked about this. Manager interview is not a final code. We would want to know what happened after that interview. One requisition crossing multiple AAP locations. So we've done a lot of webinars on these types of things. We have some white papers. One of these modules is on applicants. I would ask you to listen to those. This is problematic. What if there were, you would need to be able to tell us, if you could, if you had a pool, let's say you had 100 qualified applicants, and then you hired one person in Los Angeles, one in Redmond, and one in Kansas City. You would need to tell us who was considered for Los Angeles, who was considered for Redmond, and who was considered for Kansas City. If you couldn't tell us that, then we would have to apply all 100 of those people in that requisition to each of those AAPs, which again, you're just kind of inflating your numbers, and you don't want to do that. Another thing that we see a lot of is one requisition with hires into multiple job titles. Usually it's a lower level and a senior level. When they cross job groups, it becomes problematic. Not that you can't do that, we would recommend that you not, but not that you can't. But the pool itself, you would again have to say, okay, well, these 50 people were considered for a senior level, these 50 people were considered for a lower level, when reality is you probably posted it at a lower level and you found somebody who was really, really qualified. So when you hired them at a senior level. So there's a lot of quirky things here that we need to be cautious of. So make sure you ask your consultant if you're seeing those types of things, and we will certainly ask you when we see them. So let's look through some data validation. So we will always reconcile everything. It's not a problem. That's what we're here for, and that's what we're going to do. But there's some things that you might want to do again before you send your data in that might be helpful. And it will also, if you find a lot of errors, then there may be some things you need to retrain on the inside of your organization that are becoming problematic. So there's some real simple checks, and we've talked a lot about these, so we're not gonna dwell on many of them. But if you see missing races or genders in your history in your employee file, you're gonna want to try and find those out. If you have people missing job titles or in the wrong job title, you're going to want to change those. If you see mixed EEO and job groups, we talked about that. Remember the crane operator who was listed in 3 different job groups and EEO codes, those are problematic. Same job titles in different job groups, missing disabled or veteran status. I mean, it's okay to be missing a person if they did not identify, but we're talking about here is the whole column missing. I get data sets all the time where there's a veterans column, but there's no disabled column. They want to make sure that we have all that information. Do we have any missing locations, or do you know of any new locations? Let us know. Are you seeing compensation? And again, we'll do all this as well, that are high or low. If I see somebody making $1 an hour, I'll probably have to ask you if that's correct or what's going on here. Missing departments, census codes, whether they're accurate or not. What we kind of like to do is every few years send you a list of your titles and your census codes just to have you take a look at it. And you get them every year in your plan anyway. But if you saw something like HR director and a census code tied to a cook, you're going to know that's wrong and we need to change it. So you're going to want to kind of look at that list too to help make sure that we have everybody in the right place. Some advanced checks, we're going to be checking the current file against the prior file. If John was in the prior file, he's not in the current file, I'd expect to see him in the terms. If he's in the current file, not in the prior file, I'd expect to see him in the hires. Are people in the same title as last year? If they're not, is it a promotion and are they in the promotion file? If they're not, are they in that extra transaction file that you gave us? Are there terminations in the employee file? Are they supposed to be there? If I'm in the term file, I don't have a hire row and I'm in the current file, then we'd need to find out what's going on. For the history file for hires, are all the hires in the hire file and the applicant file? Were people hired into the same title as in the employee file? If not, is it explainable? Do we have duplicate transactions? We talked about that. People go out and add a new profile and apply to the same requisition. Is that an error? Is it something that you allow? We just want to talk through that. Promotions, is there a to and from side? Is there a movement up if that's your definition? So you want to kind of check and see who's in that promotion file. Are there duplicate transactions? If someone's being promoted multiple times during a year, we would expect to see one. I know of one system that you would input a person's promotion, and let's say a week later, the manager wants to change their internal zip code. So they put through a profile to change the internal zip code, but the system left the promotion tagged. So it looked like there were 2 promotions, but one of them was just a zip code change. So you want to check for things like that. If they're promoted multiple times, you kind of make sure you can follow the track of the title. What was it last year? I've got 2 promotions. What is it in the new roster? And then terminations. Is there a reason? Can you tell if it's voluntary, involuntary? Are there duplicate entries with no rehire? And we talked about some of those. And the applicant file. Oh man, the applicant file. So again, this is your highest risk. So we want to make sure that we're kind of looking at it with a fine-tooth comb. We're looking for the disabled and vets fields. Again, don't if they were given the opportunity to self-identify and they didn't, that's fine. But again, sometimes we see an applicant file that has the vets fields, but it does not have a disabled field. Checking for missing races and gender for hires. Again, don't change your systems. We just need to see if we can make sure that we can get them for the rest of the data and analysis. Validate your disposition codes. Are they in a final state? So there's a difference between, we have to record everybody. For record keeping purposes, we have to save all of the data, but only certain people who meet the definition of an internet applicant will be in the analysis. So we need to be able to understand your disposition codes and know who meets that definition and who does not. So your codes are really important. Ensure there's a hire in every requisition. If not, we're going to remove it unless it's a parent rec, a pool rec, and then it stays in. Check for AAP locations, remove any canceled requisitions, and then notate those that were hired but never started. So you might have a requisition with a hire in it, and we can't find that person in the hire file, and that's because they never started. So we want to just make sure we can identify those people. Some advanced checks, make sure every hire is in the current employee snapshot. If they're not in the snapshot where they terminated, and make sure they're in the term file. Make sure that the title they were hired into in the applicant file is the same, and if not, can you explain it? Verify all your one-to-one hires. So one-to-one hire. Mary applies for this job. She is the only person who applied for this job, so I hired her. So it looks like one hire, one applicant. We want to make sure we know the reason for those and that there aren't too many of one-to-one hires. Or if you use that parent rec or pool rec and hired Mary from there, we need to know that as well. Separate non-applicant codes from applicant codes. Just make sure we can understand your applicant codes and know who meets that definition. And then watch for multiple hires and recs with different titles. So we just want to make sure we can understand what happened. So what are some best practices? Review and correct your data at the time of your AAP development. Don't wait till you get an audit notice. There are just so many problems that arise with that. We'll go over your plan again as soon as you get an audit, just to triple check it, but let's get it as clean as we can to start with. Communicate with your consultants if you have any changes. We just did a complete reorg. We changed every title in the company. We had these these locations close, or we're getting ready to do a merger or whatever that might be. Just let them know. Communicate with your consultant if you change HR or applicant tracking systems. We have a fabulous guide that's a checklist for you if you're changing systems, so that you'll know the right questions to ask of a new or potential vendor to make sure that you can stay in compliance. Ensure that your proper use of disposition codes, and make sure that your recruiters are using them consistently. That's probably the biggest key for you, is consistency. And then work with your consultant to establish a timeline. It can become a little bit problematic if you have a January AAP, and let's say something comes up, because it always comes up. You don't get your data in until June, your plans aren't done until August, and then you're trying to communicate your results. We don't want you to look bad and have your CEO say, well, this data is now 8 months old. Why are you just telling me? So we want to just make sure that you have a timeline, and that you're trying to stick to it. And if you can't, that's absolutely fine. Just let your consultant know. This last one is a big one. So if you can invite anybody who touches that AAP process, including the person who pulls the data to your kickoff call, um, wow, that makes a world of difference. Sometimes the person who pulls the data doesn't know why they're pulling. They can't connect all the dots. They don't know kind of the big picture. And in every single time that I've been on a call and the data person has been on that initial call, the data comes back better. So I think they just need to connect the dots and really understand why they're doing it. It's not just another report that they're pulling for you. I think it'll make a big difference for you. So I keep mentioning all these modules, and you've seen this probably at the end. If you've watched any other modules, you've seen it at the end. But here's a list of everything that's available to you. It's all out in the portal. If you have any questions on those, I'll let your consultant know. A lot of really good stuff out there. And then thank you so much for participating. If you have any questions, contact your consultant or direct them to info@dcliconsult.com. And thank you so much for participating.